Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to the Word of the Day podcast, where useful words are pleasantly explained. My name is Jamie Silva. I am your host, and today I am exceedingly pleased to welcome back to the program for her second appearance, the very talented voice actor Paige. Paige, thanks so much for being here again.
Thanks so much for having me back again.
Well, folks, we've got a whole lot of linguistic goodness to share with you today, so let's get right to it. Up first, of course, is today's word, which is muse. Muse has both a noun form and a verb form, so let's start with the verb. I would define this as to mentally theorize or wonder about. So like if you were mulling over something in your mind or pondering it and trying to make sense of it somehow, that I would say is musing. And I want to distinguish musing from merely thinking about something or maybe contemplating it. In my view, musing is deeper. It's more curious, more engaged with the object of the musing, and it isn't content with merely taking it in.
So if you're staring at a painting and you think to yourself, dang, what a great painting this is, you're more just contemplating it, which of course is fine. People go to museums to do that all the time. But if you look at this painting and you think to yourself, I wonder what the artist was thinking about when he painted this. Maybe he was upset at the time, as some of these rough brushstrokes indicate. Oh, and also, is that yellow smudge in the corner intentional? Or did the artist drip mustard from his ham sandwich on the canvas as he was working and then just try to make the best of it? I wonder.
Right, yeah, so I would say that those reflections you just heard are definitely musings. They show that you're not merely observing what's in front of you, you're really grappling with it mentally. You're asking yourself questions about it, imagining things about it, that sort of thing.
Right. It's sort of like mental riffing. Like you're taking an idea or object and building on it, running with it, playing with it, etc. You may not arrive at a definitive answer. In fact, you may not even be trying to, but you like to think about it all the same. That's musing.
Now, muse as a verb can also frequently refer to verbalizing your internal musings, to speak thoughtfully, or to wonder aloud. This is the same basic idea as what we just discussed, just out loud, to an audience of at least one person. I mean, I guess you can technically muse aloud while alone, but then you're just talking to yourself, which I feel like is basically indistinguishable, conceptually speaking, from mental musing. But, whatever. I'm sort of quibbling. Paige, do you have the Google definition for muse?
I sure do. There are 3 definitions for the verb form, and I'll just read them off. First, to be absorbed in thought. Second, to say to oneself in a thoughtful manner. And third, to gaze thoughtfully at, unquote. Well, what do we think of these?
I'm not a big fan of them, honestly, because they're not specific enough. So, gazing thoughtfully is close, but as we just talked about, you have to be more engaged with whatever you're looking at in order for it to qualify as musing. So it sort of depends on what those thoughts are. Same goes for being absorbed in thought, that first definition. That's a starting point, maybe, but again, we don't know anything about the nature of those thoughts and whether they are indeed of the musing sort. And lastly, saying something to yourself in a thoughtful manner, quote unquote, is one form of musing, but it leaves out situations where you're musing aloud, in front of other people, which you can absolutely do.
I think Merriam-Webster's take on the verb is closer to what we're looking for. Their definitions are as follows. First, quote, to think about something carefully and thoroughly. And then secondly, to think or say something in a thoughtful way, unquote. Now, these still don't include all the, you should be wondering, not just contemplating nuances, but that's fine. That stuff is more about usage than the definition anyway.
Yeah, I guess so. Also, the second definition, thinking about something thoughtfully, sounds a little redundant to me, but I think there's some real truth there. Because when you think about it, a lot of thinking that people do isn't actually very thoughtful. It's just thoughts, right? Like, does that make sense, Paige?
Maybe, but it's a little more philosophical than we need to be, that's for sure. Were you trying to muse about the true meaning of musing?
I do believe I was. No real conclusions to speak of, but that's okay. Because a lot of the time, musing will be inconclusive and leave you with more questions than answers.
Well, good job then, I suppose.
Thank you. Okay, now that we've sort of set the record straight on the verb form of muse, let's turn to the noun form. Now, this is almost a proper noun, actually, which we've never before featured on the show.
And just as an FYI/reminder, a proper noun is a noun that refers to a person, place, or thing and is spelled with a capital letter.
Now, to understand why Muse is on the cusp of being, or maybe arguably is, a proper noun, you have to go back to the origin of Muse.
In Greek mythology, there were 9 minor deities known as muses, who were the divine protectors of the arts. And in that capacity, they were said to inspire authors, singers, actors, painters, and all manner of other creative types. Like, imagine that the renowned ancient Greek playwright Sophocles was hard at work on his masterpiece, Oedipus the King and Other Tragedies, and he sort of got writer's block, and he started pacing back and forth, thinking to himself, well, gosh, this scene just isn't tragic enough. Is there something I could have the chorus sing that would absolutely bring the audience to its knees with grief? I don't know. I just can't think of anything. In this situation, folks, our friend Sophocles might call upon Melpomene.
That would be Melpomene, Paige. Rhymes with hominy.
Sorry, what's hominy?
Oh, yes, a hominy. This is a food made from dried, soaked corn kernels. It's a key ingredient in grits, that classic dish of the American South, and can be paired with peas if you want to serve up some peas and hominy.
Oh, okay. So Sophocles might call upon Melpomene, the muse of tragedy, to help him out with his writer's block, and hopefully she would heed his pleas and send him some inspiration for the next scene.
Yeah, that's basically how it worked. Which is why, if you wrote something back then, I think you were supposed to give some credit or a shout out of some kind to the relevant muse.
Yeah, and there were a lot of muses to choose from. Melpomene
Very good.
was one of 9, and Jamie and I will go through all of them now, occasionally borrowing from the descriptions found at GreekMythology.com.
First up is Clio. Now, this muse is credited with discovering history, which is kind of a funny concept, because she discovered that things were happening? Or I guess that means she came up with the idea of recording important things that happened and then telling people about them later. Anyway, so Clio discovered history and guitar, which seems unrelated to history. Quoting now from the website, history was named Clio in the ancient years because the Greek word kleos means heroic acts. Clio was always represented with a clarion, which is like a trumpet, in her right hand, and a book in the left hand.
Wait, she's holding a trumpet? I thought she was the muse of guitar.
Yeah, hey, wait a minute. That is odd.
Anyway, up next we have Euterpe, the muse of music, and particularly lyric poetry, which I'm just going to assume sounded a lot like poetry slams today, only in Greek.
Yeah, that sounds fair.
Euterpe was behind the rise of liberal and fine arts in ancient Greece, and is typically shown holding a flute.
Thirdly, we've got Thalia, the muse of comedy, which is pretty straightforward. And Thalia is generally seen holding one of those creepy, smiling theatrical masks.
Fourth is, oh my gosh, Jamie, why do I always get Gromedy, whatever? I can't say this. It's too weird.
Yes, you can, Paige. You did just before.
I don't want to, though. It's so hard.
Hominy, remember? Grits?
Fine. Fourth is Melpomene, the muse of tragedy, who we've already met. Logically, she holds a creepy, frowning theatrical mask.
There, that wasn't so hard, was it?
Yes, it was. But moving along, the fifth muse is named Terpsichore, the muse of dance. She is usually shown holding a lyre, which is sort of like an ancient guitar and is spelled Lyre.
Given that, as we learned earlier, Clio was the discoverer of guitar, I imagine she determined that fostering the development of both history and guitar was too much work. So she handed it off to Terpsichore, which, the muse of dancing, muse of guitar, that makes sense.
Sure, why not? The sixth muse is Erato, the muse of love poetry. She, confusingly, is also usually depicted with a lyre and or a bow and arrow, which seems to be encroaching on Cupid's turf a little bit, especially given the overlap in their specialties, but I'm sure they talked about it and had an understanding.
For the seventh muse, we have Polymnia, the muse of hymns, to the Greek deities. Her name actually means many hymns, poly meaning many, and hymnia, hymns. She's also credited with overseeing, or inventing, depending on who you ask, geometry, grammar, and meditation. And Polymnia is usually shown holding, you guessed it, a lyre. and wearing a very serious expression with her finger to her lips, presumably in the act of shushing people so that they'll pay attention to her nice hymns.
Muse number 8 was Urania, the protector of stars and celestial objects and the inventor of astronomy. She is shown holding a globe that I think could represent any planet or celestial object, and is pointing to it with a little pointer thingy.
The ninth and final muse was Calliope, the muse of epic poetry and eloquence. She is reputed to be the chief of the muses, the wisest, the most assertive, and with the best singing voice. Among her fans, we can count the renowned ancient Greek poet Homer, who invoked her, which is to say, called upon her for inspiration, at the start of both the Iliad and the Odyssey.
So, that famous opening line from the Odyssey, the one that goes, "Sing to me of the man, Muse, the man of twists and turns." Well, that muse is Calliope. And legend has it that she was so impressed by the great job Homer did with his poems that she's often shown in paintings and statues holding a copy of the Iliad or Odyssey, which is honestly a way better endorsement than like a dust jacket blurb.
The great Roman poet Virgil also invokes Calliope in his epic poem, the Aeneid, and then Dante gives her a shout out in the Divine Comedy. So she's got a lot of credits, you might say. And that is all the muses we have for you today. Basically, folks, if you were being artistic in ancient Greece, in whatever form, there was probably a muse for that. And that's why muse can be capitalized as a proper noun, particularly if it refers to one of these here Greek muses.
Nowadays, of course, these muses don't get many mentions, right? Oscar winners aren't up there on stage tearfully thanking their favorite muse. Jamie, what the heck?
What?
Why do my sections of this episode include literally every single mention of that muse?
Sorry, which muse?
You know which muse. Melania, or astronomy, or whatever.
Oh, Melpomene. Yes, the muse of tragedy.
More like the muse of unpronounceable names.
That's not very nice. Paige, are you gonna do this section or not?
Couldn't producer Pete just do it?
No, we don't allow him on mic anymore.
Oh, is this because of the noodle incident?
We don't talk about that, Paige. Here, I'll just do it. Right. So, folks, you don't see Oscar winners up there on stage nowadays tearfully thanking their favorite muse, Melpomene, for inspiring them to write such a tragic, moving screenplay, thus allowing them to take home the Oscar for most gratuitously depressing film that will make you super sad for no good reason.
You don't watch the Oscars, do you?
No. Is that not a real category?
No. Now, while the Greek muses don't get a lot of love these days, you might hear people reference other hypothetical muses as the reason they came up with a great creative idea, or perhaps to blame the lack of a muse for why they don't have any good ideas right now.
So someone might say to a friend, well, time for me to get back to writing my novel. I sure hope the muse of fiction inspires me today, because I have no idea how I'm going to kill off all these extra characters.
Or a songwriter might say, I came up with 3 great chord progressions in the last hour. I must have been visited by the muse of thoughtful indie folk music.
Notice that not only are these hypothetical people making up their own muses, they don't have to give them names. They can just be the muse of whatever creative activity you're doing, or maybe even non-creative activity. If we wanted to be really broad here, which I think is fine because muses aren't real anyway, you could facetiously give thanks to the muse of math for helping you calculate an 18% tip without using your phone.
Or maybe at work, you could call upon the muse of management to help you brainstorm ways to enhance cross-departmental synergies in service of your company's fiscal year 2020 sales goals.
Absolutely. Again, I say go for it. I think being creative with the uses of muse is 100% in the spirit of this word.
Also, if there's a particular person you get a lot of your great ideas from, you can praise or give credit to them by saying that they are your muse. The Google definition takes this sense into account, reading, quote, a person or personified force who is the source of inspiration for a creative artist, unquote. And then, just for good measure, Merriam-Webster's definition of the noun form of muse goes, quote, a source of inspiration, especially a guiding genius, unquote. And of course, individual people can be both of these things.
They sure can. And that's about it, honestly. Odds are, folks, if you're engaged in a creative pursuit, you can credit a muse with helping inspire you. And I really like this word and this whole concept, because it speaks to how difficult it is to pinpoint where ideas come from, especially artistic, creative ideas, which often just seem to spring from nowhere in a flash of inspiration. And since their origin seems so inexplicable, it's kind of fun to attribute them to some kind of external, benevolent creative force. A muse, in short. Okay, it's now time to get a couple examples of how to use muse in everyday conversation or writing.
Example number 1. You know how people always say they're juggling a lot of responsibilities? Muse Tyrell. Well, I wonder if, say, professional jugglers sometimes joke with each other about how many responsibilities they're juggling. Or maybe every time someone says that, they lose their focus and drop a plate because the idiom is just so triggering for them.
Example number 2 is actually a haiku, which is a form of poetry consisting of 3 lines. The first line being 5 syllables, the second 7 syllables, and the third line 5 syllables once again. Here we go. The muse of haikus inspired this example. Nicely done, oh muse.
That was interesting.
Oh, thank you. My haiku muse is a pretty great muse, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, all right. Example number 3 comes from Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Quote, "The following Monday, Anne surprised her Aunt Marilla by coming down from her room with her basket of books on her arm and her lips primmed up into a line of determination. 'I'm going back to school,' she announced. 'That is all there is left in life for me, now that my friend has been ruthlessly torn from me. In school, I can at least look at her and muse over days departed.' 'You'd better muse over your lessons and sums,' said Marilla." Unquote.
Okay, folks, I don't think this episode would be complete without a bit more gratuitous poetry.
Wait, Jamie, has the haiku muse sung again?
No, actually, this is a totally different muse. And folks, actually, for the poem you're about to hear, Paige herself was my muse. Because I wrote it a couple years ago, after a brief conversation with Paige about the proper pronunciation of Gruyere, that famous cheese. There are a few different viable pronunciations, by the way, but for rhyming purposes in this poem, we use the most common American style. Paige, you ready?
A muse is always ready.
Well, sorry to correct you, but no, not really. Muses are actually very temperamental and fickle. They inspire you or leave you devoid of creativity as they please. And they'll basically never sing or speak on command. That's why you have to be so grateful to them when they do visit you, or plead for them to come if they haven't.
Oh, well, okay, fine. I'm ready.
Great. Okay, this poem is called An Ode to Gruyere, or An Hommage to Fromage. And by the way, an homage is just like a tribute to something, and fromage is the French word for cheese, and Gruyere, again, is a type of cheese.
A very famous type of cheese, I might add. In fact, just this March, a Swiss Gruyere took home first prize at the annual World Championship Cheese Contest in Wisconsin, beating out 3,666 other entries.
Wow, remarkable. Anyway, so folks, as we read this poem, there will be a few slightly fancy or obscure words scattered throughout, because that's just something you get to do in poetry. So Paige and I will just quickly define those as we go through. Also, sorry, can we just dim the lights in the studio here, please? Thank you. Just gotta set the mood, right? This is very serious artistic stuff.
Super serious.
There is not so debonair.
Which kind of means suave or cool. And also, this is not as in nothing, which we explored in episode 52.
Thank you, Paige. Let's just start again. There is not so debonair as nibbling camembert.
Another type of cheese.
Or crackers with Gruyere while whistling an air.
Which is like a song.
Any air will do, really.
Not e'en the great eclair, that pastry of such flair, could hope to quite compare with crackers and Gruyere. As a snack, that is.
When noshing on Gruyere, show off your savoir-faire. Savoir-faire?
Having a bit of a Melpomene moment, are we?
Yeah, the muse of French pronunciation has not visited me in years, if ever. So I think this is savoir-faire.
This is a French phrase meaning the ability to act or speak appropriately in social situations. So basically, having super good manners and a great sense of tact and proper etiquette. Now, Jamie, back to you.
Thank you again, Paige. Once again, show off your savoir-faire, keep your pinky in the air, and say, I do declare. This hits the spot.
One can never quite prepare for requests that you would share a slice of your Gruyere. Say, sorry, none to spare. Maybe get your own?
Who hasn't known the terror of seeing cupboard bare, bereft of all Gruyere?
Bereft of, in this context, basically means lacking.
But stop, do not despair. Just go get some more.
Some would even dare to pilfer your Gruyere.
Pilfer means steal.
Of these thieves, beware. You must stay alert, mon cher.
This is French for my dear.
It's often those closest to you.
I had an old gray mare, I named her Maud St. Clair, fed her nothing but Gruyere, and at the county fair, she won best in show.
No lion in his lair, nor king upon his chair, could hope to rule fair, absent knowledge of Gruyere. It's Monarchy 101.
If a mouse you must ensnare, for bait, don't use Gruyere, I beg you, please, forbear.
Forbear in this context basically means don't do it.
Use a little chunk of pear, with peanut butter on it.
Once I slipped whilst unaware, dropped a platter of Gruyere, face down upon the stair. Oh, how my guest did glare. Chided I, you needn't stare. Remember the 5-second rule.
When dining out somewhere, and I get the bill of fare,
Which just means the bill or check.
and the waiter says, right there, the 4 flights of Gruyere will be $60 square. I pay without a care, and I tip the waiter fair, 'cause it's worth every penny.
From Boston to Bel Air, across this land so fair, that we call a mare, Ica, I swear, no cheese can top Gruyere. I know, I've tried them all.
Peoples everywhere do gather here and there to say a little prayer for more crackers and Gruyere, lest we run out. Oh, thank you everyone. Folks, that's just the word of the day staff. They're our in-studio audience for all our poetry slams, and they're too kind. Thank you all.
Oh, this actually reminds me. Producer Pete was telling me before the show that the staff has to applaud after poetry readings and any other performances. Like, it's right in their contracts. Is that true?
Of course not. Here, see for yourself. Hey, loyal subject, staff, if applause is optional, I want you to just clap, okay? See, Paige, not mandatory at all. Now, folks, moving along. You can get the whole poem at the Word of the Day Medium page, which will also link to the Facebook page and Instagram. Also, as it happens, if you Google my favorite cheese-related quotation from G.K. Chesterton, the poets have been mysteriously silent on the subject of cheese, unquote. This here poem that you just heard should be the first result. Really, it's a great honor for the show.
And a great honor for Gruyere.
That too. So Paige, how's it feel to be a muse?
Pretty good, honestly. It's like I get some of the credit despite not having written any of the poem.
Yep, that's basically how being a muse works. It's a pretty plum job if you ask me. Which reminds me, folks, if there are any muses in your life who've inspired you to create something, perhaps send them this episode with a note thanking them for being your muse. Alrighty then, this has been another episode of the Word of the Day podcast, where useful words are pleasantly explained. My name is Jamie Silva. I am your host. Paige has been our talented voice actor guest. Thank you so much, Paige.
Thanks again for having me, Jamie.
And speaking for all of us here at the Word of the Day podcast, thank you folks for listening. And as always, we hope you and your muses have a great